McLuhan believes that the most important aspect of media is not to be located within the issues surrounding cultural content, but in the technical medium of communication. McLuhan's later work is very formalist and concerned with how qualities of technology interact with us, their impact on society, and how media can lead to great cultural changes. These works reverse many of his earlier reflections. The medium is the message, according to McLuhan. For example, in order to attend to the ideological or semiotic construction of an article in the 21st century news article would be missing the point. The study of the way technical forms of media shape human perception constitutes the most important theoretical issue facing media studies today. McLuhan tries to explain this with the example of electrical lights and how important they are in recontextualising social relations. By switching on a light in one's office in the morning conveys no message. However, by switching this light on in the evening, it allows one to work until late or the early morning, and therefore transforms relations of time and space. Innes was an economic historian who believed that communication networks are important in terms of the information that they carry and the impact that they have on social forms of organisation. He stated that any given medium of communication, as opposed to the message, is biased in terms of either time or space. Dominant media forms in the pre-printing era, such as parchment, clay and stone, were time rather than space biased, as they were difficult to transport through space, but they proved to be a robust medium that managed to endure the passage of time. Innes attempted to extend his distinction between time and space biased media through a comparison between oral and literate societies, the principal medium of communication of oral societies and speech, but not the only medium. By relying on speech, a strong temporal bias is encouraged within oral societies. The invention of writing crystallized the oral tradition, allowed different traditions and cultures to escape the spatial limitations of society, and made speech an object for studying future societies. Time and space are best viewed as a conflict, where the progressive elimination of one leads to the dominance of another. Innes is right to draw attention to the technical media of communication having a definite impact on the social organisation of culture. However, limitations of Innes include his conceptualisation of the interface between technical media, space and time as having bias towards one pole doesn't always exclude the other. Therefore, Innes's ideas would have to be re-evaluated in order to account for a more contemporary process. McLuhan has closely followed Innes by arguing that whereas oral societies were time-biased, literal cultures were space-biased. This was until the development of electronic communication, which replaced printing practices and refuted Innes's early ideas. Due to his attention to the technologies of cultural dissemination, modern technologies are no longer viewed as alienating. This is because McLuhan came to believe that all technologies are extensions of our physical and nervous systems to increase power and speed. For example, radio is represented as a technological expression of the ear in the same way that clothing is the technological projection of the skin. McLuhan proposes that the extensions of senses radically changes the experience of the world and accordingly the culture of those involved. Communication systems have put us in constant and immediate touch with different perspectives. The coordinates of time and space have vanished to proclaim a world where the sense of individualised attachment fostered by a book culture that has given way to one where everyone is profoundly involved with everyone else. The global village has swept aside the hierarchical, uniform and individualising culture of print production and replaced it with a more tactile culture. The explosion of new media has destructed the visual bias of written forms of communication, returning the globe's citizens to a shared culture that has much in common with that of oral societies. McLuhan is purely theory-based. There is no empirical evidence in place to back up his assumptions, therefore making it an unreliable theory as it cannot be proved or disproved due to the fact that it is an untestable hypothesis. The emergence of new media occurred at different times in different places in the world. He doesn't seem to aim his theory at any particular culture, so we're left wondering whether he means to apply it globally to all societies or whether he is just referring to Western cultures. Also, he displaces his attention from the impact that relations of power and force have within the social historical world. His theoretical neglect of mass communication's role in the production of symbolic meanings and the maintenance of dominant social relations unnecessarily brackets off critical questions related to the organisation of institutions, culture and ideology.
We now focus on Jean Baudrillard. He argues that before any object is used by the consumer public, that object, or good as he terms it, must first establish a meaning and become a sign, since it's very difficult to sell a box of bold washing powder as just a box of washing powder. This meaning, whatever it may be, is determined through the organisation of many different signs into codes, and Baudrillard argues that these codes are what gives humans our needs and sense of self. As he himself states, a need is not a need for a particular object, as much as it is a need for difference. These codes are part of a larger hierarchy, with their primary use being to signify varying degrees of status, and the further up that chain you go, the more status something connotes and the more desirable it becomes. Which is how we end up with advertisements depicting washing powder as a luxurious miracle worker that transforms your curtain rag dress into silk in just one wash. Baudrillard also claims that consumers are becoming part of what he calls the automatic writing of the system. This is to say that consumers are now being mobilised into the increased consumption of goods without which the entire system would fold in on itself like a house of cards. So consumers are doing so out of duty and not out of choice. This feeds into the idea of the gift. Not a nice gift like 50 quid in a Christmas card, but a bad gift which maintains the social order. This was first put forward by Marcel Mauss, and Baudrillard builds upon this by saying that capitalism maintains dominance over the workers by offering the gift of work, which can't ever be truly reciprocated. It's as if the capitalists had tied this gift to a submarine and then launched it into the depths of the sea. Speaking of capitalism, Baudrillard is also fairly critical of traditional Marxist interpretations of the media, with his primary concern being that it places too much of an emphasis on a political economic reading of history, which in turn reduces certain social traditions to mere production practices. Marxism, according to Baudrillard, only offers a symbolic code where humans just make stuff, and everything we do is tied to making stuff. Although Marxism can offer a theory for economic production, it does little, if anything, to properly account for social practices that don't mirror production logic. For instance, take the act of lovemaking. According to Marxist logic, people only have sex for one reason: to produce offspring. That's it. You only sleep with your significant other and/or that random stranger from down the pub because you want babies. And whilst that's true on a biological level, we know that's not the sole reason most of the time. Such is the nature of Marxist theory, at least in Baudrillard's opinion. It rarely discusses the importance of signs and symbols, which takes us to Baudrillard's three-stage simulation theory. This argues that the progression towards the modern age and everything it entails, good and bad, has gone through three historical stages. The first, the age of counterfeit, took place between the Renaissance and the Industrial Revolution and had nothing to do with widespread use of fake money. Instead, Baudrillard claims that this first stage was a period where signs truly did signify prestige. You could tell from a distance who was royalty and who was a plague-ridden tramp. And then along came Shakespeare plays, where people who couldn't necessarily afford the ostentatious clothing of the royalty could still get away with wearing it if they pranced around a stage for a few hours, blurring the obvious distinction between classes in the process. The second stage, the age of production, accompanies capitalism, and in the words of Walter Benjamin, destroyed the aura of a work of art, as it could endlessly be reproduced to the point where it isn't unique or special anymore, just like the baby you wound up with from that stranger down the pub. Baudrillard takes this idea and develops it in the final stage, the age of simulation, or the present day as it's more commonly known. This isn't quite living in the Matrix as much as it is the Matrix and other popular culture dictating what is and isn't real. Television and cinema are now not so much imitating reality, but openly shaping it. This often ends up resembling an idealised world which we end up accepting as fact and unsuccessfully pursuing until the simulation pushes us into the grave.